Um, Bill would help out with almost anything. He was, a very giving individual. A hoagie sale, even something as most people would consider mundane as a alarm, he would usually show up. He loved hanging out with the kids. So if there's something involving with the kids, especially fire prevention, like he was all over it. He would stay at the trucks at the fire prevention, take the kids around, ask them if they had any questions, show them the various pieces of equipment. He loved that. He would go to our local elementary school. The fire company would do fire prevention. However, we have a PM preschool. Fire prevention was always in the morning, so the PM preschool kind of got left behind. So when our son started going, he made a special trip and would do that. So he would do a special PM preschool fire prevention presentation, really up until the year he had passed away. He came in full turnout gear with a mask and would talk, and so the kids wouldn't be scared. But he would open it up with this puppet that he would use. Originally it was given to our son, but he wanted no parts of it, so then my husband took it over and used it. And the kids loved it. It completely disarmed them. I think he had 2 criers in the time that he started doing that. But he'd get down on the floor with the kids and get to their level. And he just loved kids. And so he, utilized that, and, because he was just a big kid at heart himself. Spend time with our kids. When he was much younger, he would work on cars, his motorcycle that, he had given up like years ago. Just hanging out with friends. He just always found like that youthful spirit that was within. He was a realtor, so he would do, especially with his last real estate group, Keller Williams, they would have like Red Day, so there was a volunteer. So if there was an opportunity to volunteer, he would usually do that. One year was in an animal shelter. Another year, I believe he volunteered with them at Ronald McDonald House. So he was, usually give whenever the opportunity arose back to a community in some way, whether it was the community we lived in or another one that had a volunteer opportunity that popped up. It's kind of funny. It started out with my son, who was little. My sister was watching him, and the Deptford Volunteer Fire Company must have been responding to something, so the sirens were on, and she made mention it was a fire truck. My son got all excited. He's like 2 or 3 at the time. So my dad then turned around, who was also watching my son on some days, and popped in some YouTube videos. So I couldn't tell you how many different rollout videos we have seen throughout time. There were some videos were much better than others because they were much longer than 30 seconds. So as we're watching that, it kind of inspired my husband. He's like, well, this looks really cool. Like, I think I could do this. So at a much older phase in his life, that's when he decided to volunteer with our local fire company because he was inspired by a toddler watching YouTube videos. I guess similar or different than other people. I kind of sort of grew up, my dad was a volunteer firefighter, so I understood what it meant that the pager would go off, and sometimes at the most inopportune times, and out the door my dad would go. So when it moved forward and then my husband joined, I was, I guess already accustomed to that taking place. So there was times like they had a meeting night on Halloween on a Monday one time, and kids and I went trick-or-treating, and he went to the firehouse because that's what happened. So, I always, whenever the pager would go off and he would leave, I told him to just have fun. To kind of put in the back of my mind the dangerous element that could be there. He'd be fine, he'd have fun, and he'd come back home because that's what is supposed to happen. So when they had the mandatory burn building night at the fire academy, the same, he had been on sabbatical for a little while. He had a hernia, so he wasn't allowed to do anything, had it repaired, came back. So this was like one of the really first major event he came back for. He was all excited that he's going in the burn building. Yeah. The guys from the fire company were, very supportive. One is particularly like my connection. So if any questions, anything comes up, along the way, he's the one I contact, for anything like post death. The captain of the fire company, they just got acquainted. He took my son over to the firehouse after school with his son and showed him the entire equipment. Now it's all lettered, it has the equipment. So they've been, very good and very supportive. My son goes back and forth about like maybe doing like a fire science major because he's 13 now. I said, whatever you want, like I will support you. And if this is what you want to do, like I harbor no ill feelings towards it. It's just, unfortunately, it was a, rather quirky accident. But it's not their fault what happened. So, my son, he's leaning towards that direction. I will, back him up. And, we do countless fire preventions, mainly because of my son. So we visit, various different companies around, and, the kids have a good time. They are not, it doesn't make them overly sad when we show up at a firehouse. But, they were, I can't say enough good things. The guys at the fire station were, they practiced, they had everything all together for the day of the funeral. It was very impressive how they pulled it together. And unfortunately, and their wives and girlfriends, they had to sacrifice the time that the guys had to be away to prepare for my husband's funeral. So I was, very grateful to them for, again, sacrificing more time out of their lives, again, for the fire company. The one thing I would like people to remember about Bill is how to relate things. Because again, he loved kids and he was very good about that, but he always tried to relate things to people who this may not be their primary source of knowledge. Because everyone, no matter what field you work in, you throw jargon around, and outside lay people have no idea what you're talking about, but he always tried to do a good job of trying to make sure that they understood what, he was talking about. So if adults ask questions, even, when they were with their kids for the fire equipment, he would just try to break it down to a level that they could understand. So again, maybe they might be less fearful if, God forbid, the fire company showed up at their house at 2 a.m. And just to embrace life. Like Bill just loved encountering new things and new experiences, learning new things. So, just to not be afraid to move forward, because Bill wasn't.